All of a sudden, the wooden planks gave way as everything fell to the ground. I grabbed onto the bars of the windows as I was hovering over my bed. I can do this, I said to myself as I managed to pull myself up to the window and start attacking the cell bars. I looked down as the guards heard the noise and came rushing in. "Hey!" one of them shouted. I then spat at them as I managed to pull off one of the cell bars, and I then slid into the air vents where the window was connected to. "So long, suckers," I said as I turned around and went on with my mission. The guards were radioing for more backup. "He has gone up in the air vents," one of them said as they began to start throwing the wood pallets at me. I started going through the air vents as I was trying to find a way out where I wouldn't be caught out by the guards. I must have crawled around for over 20 minutes as the alarm was going over and over in my ear. All of a sudden, I turned a right corner as I looked around and saw an opening. I went over to the opening and looked through it. All I saw was Jasmine laying in the medical bed. I then began to tear up as I looked at her. "This is all my fault," I said to myself as I felt guilty. Jasmine then flatlined. I was shocked. I didn't know what to do. She was shaking up and down. "I have to do something," I said as no one was even close to helping her. I then rattled the cell bars as I tried to get in there. I suddenly shouted, "Someone help!" Noon was listening. I then ripped off the bars as I needed to get down there and perform CPR. Come on," I said to myself as the bars were slowly moving. I kicked down on the bars as one of them slowly broke. I tried to squeeze myself through the tiny gap. The other bar then broke off. I then landed on my feet as Jasmine was still flatlining. "I'm here," I said as I tried to perform CPR on her. "Come on," I said as I didn't want her to die. "I love you," I suddenly said as she suddenly woke up her eyes. She gazed at me. "Yes," I said as I pumped my fist in the air as I somehow made her survive. "I love you," I suddenly said again. She began to frown. "Oh, it's you," she said as she began talking. "I just saved your life," I said to her. "Well, you are the one to put me in here," she replied, showing off her bruises from the attack. "I'm sorry once again," I said. "That was a mistake. I was angry at you and your mother, and I shouldn't have hurt you," I continued to say as I got down on one knee. "I really like you, Jasmine," I said to her as I grabbed her hand. She pulled her hand away as all of a sudden I heard a knock at the door. "What's going on in there?" someone said as they tried to open the door. "It's locked," he said to himself as I turned around and began to look for stuff to block up the door. I took the cupboard and blocked the door with it. "What are you doing?" Jasmine asked as I was pushing the cupboard with all my might. "I can't let them in here," I said to her. "But, I need medical attention," she said. "I know, and I'm here," I said as I was tearing up. "I have never liked anyone before," I said to Jasmine as I walked back over and grabbed her hand. "I'm with someone," Jasmine insisted. "He doesn't matter anymore," I said as I then tried to kiss her. She couldn't do anything as she was too ill to move. So I kissed her on the lips. "What are you doing?" she said to me. "I love you," I said as she couldn't do anything. "George, this is borderline rape," she said. "No, it isn't," I replied, defending my actions. I then got on top of her. "Please stop," Jasmine said as she couldn't move her arms or legs. I then began to unzip my pants as Jasmine was shocked. "No, please," she said as I then began to pull off her clothes. The guards were banging on the door. "Stop," one of them shouted as I was then proceeding to have sex with Jasmine without her permission. "You are going to be in so much trouble," she said. "Noon is going to believe you," I said as I then pulled out of her and did my pants up. That was nice. I said to her. No, it wasn't. She replied as she began to tear up. She didn't want to look at me. All of a sudden, the cupboard fell to the ground as the guards had the strength to bash in. Stop right there. One of them said as I turned around and looked at them. Or what? I questioned as I was still on top of Jasmine. One of the guards then leaped at me as they jumped on the bed. Jasmine was underneath as she couldn't feel a thing. Please get off me, she said as I then jumped down as the other guard then grabbed me. All of a sudden, Jasmine then suffered a heart attack. The guards turned around as I managed to then dashed out of the room as they tried to help Jasmine. I then ran down the hallway and slid into a cupboard as I needed to get the guards of my back. This place is too big for me, I said as all of a sudden I leaned against the wall. It began to turn around. What's going on? I said as I grabbed the wall as I was then transported to an office room. Oh wow, I said in surprise as I jumped off the turntable and began to look around the office. Why would they have that secret pathway in this huge place? I said to myself as I sat on a chair and began to lean back. All of a sudden, the alarm began to go off. I fell to the floor as I then hit my head on the ground. Ow, I said as I was laying on the floor looking at the ceiling. I then pointed at a hole in the ceiling. What's that? I said as I slowly got myself up and began to try to get up to the hole in the ceiling. I then began to crawl around the air vents as I really wanted to see where this room led to. I turned to the left at AT junction as all of a sudden the smell began to pick up. What's that smell? I said to myself as I continued to crawl across the air vents. The smell was picking up with each step I took. What the fuck? I said to myself as I looked down and spotted a body lying on the floor. Is that what I think it is? I said to myself as I tried to open the vent. I jumped down and landed next to the body. I turned the body over as I was covering my nose as the smell was uncontrollable. You, I said as I saw the face. I was shocked. Dad, I said as I turned it over completely and laid the body on his back. I haven't seen you for years, I said to the lifeless body. How did you get here? I asked him as there was no reply. I thought you died so many years ago, I continued to say. My mom was upset like you never guessed before. All of a sudden, the door behind me opened. Excuse me, the man said. What are you doing here? The man continued as he brought in his bucket and mop. This place is off limits, he added as I got up. What have you done to my dad? I said to him. I don't know anything about that, the man said. Then why are you coming in here? I asked him. I just have to do what the boss says, he replied. How long has my dad been here? I continued to ask him. At least the 3 months I've been here, he said. And have you told anyone? I keep questioning him. Yes, I questioned it on my first day, the man said as he closed the door. And you just continued with the body just laying here. Look, I understand you are angry, but I'm only here for a paycheck, the man said. I rolled my eyes as he continued clearing up. Okay, but if you help me, you can be in for big money. I don't need money. You just said you were working here for the money. I am, the man said as all of a sudden someone else came into the room. Hey Bart, the woman said as Bart quietly closed the door and then kissed the woman on the cheek. Just a second, darling, Bart replied as I was watching him. So if you could leave us alone, that would be great, he said as he was just about to head into the cupboard. But I still have so many questions. I don't care, Bart said as he closed the cupboard door. I then began to search through my dad's body as I needed to find clues on how he got here. I went through his right pocket and I found something. What's this? I said to myself as I was shocked as I was then reading a notebook. I love her, I continued reading. I love Doris. The notebook said. I was shocked. Doris isn't my mother. Was my dad having an affair? I said to myself as I then went through the rest of the pockets. I then pulled out an ID card. What's this? I said to myself as I then turned it over and saw a lot of blood on the other side. Why is there so much blood here? I said to myself as Bart and his mistress were getting busy in the cupboard. My dad was killed and I think I know who killed him. I said as I then pulled out a key from his top pocket. What is this for? I said as I pocketed it. I then began to get up and walk around as I needed to find out what happened to my father. I then banged on the door that Bart was getting busy in. Not now, he said to me. But I need to tell you something, I said to him. I then waited for a few seconds as his head then popped out of the door. What is it? He said. What is this? I replied as I showed him the ID of my father. That's the ID to the higher offices. He said. Now can I get back to it? He continued. I guess. I replied as he then slammed the door quickly, and he then continued to get busy. I then walked to the door that Bart came into and tried to pull the handle. All of a sudden it then fell off. What? I said to myself as I then picked it up and tried to plug it in. I then managed to get the door open and look around. All of a sudden there were two guards standing next to the door. One of them turned to me and looked up and down. Who are you? He said. I then showed my dad's ID. Oh, sorry sir, carry on, the guard said as I managed to trick him. I then began walking down the hallways, wiping the blood off the shoes. I must have walked for over 5 minutes before turning to the door on the left. I knocked on the door. Come in, the man sitting at the desk shouted. I slowly opened the door. Jack, the man said as he turned around in his chair. I have been expecting you, he continued as he then looked at me. Who are you? The man said. I'm not Jack, I replied as I was certain I wasn't Jack. I can see that, the man replied as he then reached for the guard button. I then dashed across the room and stopped him from pressing the button. What are you doing? The man said as I was grabbing his arm. Let go, the man continued as I didn't say a word. No, I then said as I spat at him. Hey, the man yelled. Guards, he added as I then put my other hand over his mouth. Shut up. He tried biting my hand as I then said. I'm here to find out what happened to my father. I don't even know who you are, the man said as I took my hand off his mouth and reached into my pocket for my dad's ID. I then showed him it. Oh wow, the man said. I haven't seen that ID in years. He continued. Tell me what happened to him, I said as I then sat down on the chair. Look, you have to understand that it was a mistake and every day that goes by, I miss him. Not as much as I miss him, I replied. I understand, the man said. Look, it was a cool dark night and we had agents go into this top secret base to stop the enemy and we just tried our best to stop him, but we couldn't and unfortunately your father was a casualty of that mission, the man said. But why is his body in an office and the janitor just ignoring it? Look, we had to keep the body for legal reasons, the man said. What reasons? I said as I banged on the desk. I can't disclose them, he said. I looked at him. What do you mean? I said. I can't tell you why we had to keep the body. I then grabbed him. You will tell me, I said as I was threatening him. Look son, we have special rules around these parts and we just can't go around telling them to any old Joe, the man said. I then looked at the photos on his desk. I then pointed at them. So what would happen if anything happened to your wife or daughter? I asked him. I would be upset like there was no tomorrow, the man said. And that's what I am feeling now. I explained. Look, look. The man said as he then grabbed the piece of paper and began to write stuff down. Here. The man said as he gave me the piece of paper. What is this? I asked the man. This is who you need to talk to if you need answers. The man continued. But why can't I get them from you? I asked. Because I have nothing to add. The man said as he then pushed me away. Now get out of my office. He said as I took the piece of paper and put it in my pocket. You are lucky, Mr. Brown. I said as I looked at the name sign on his desk. That isn't even my name. Mr. Brown said. Then what is it? None of your business. He said as then pointed me out of the office. Okay, okay. I said to him. I then left the room. I then felt my pockets. Oh shit. I said to myself as I turned around and looked through the window. I then spotted the man take the ID of my dad and put it in the shredder. I began banging on the door. What are you doing? I shouted at him. As all of a sudden a guard turned the corner of the hallway. What are you doing? The guard asked me. You should be asking him that. I said as I pointed to the man inside the office. What about Mr. B. Rohn? The guard asked. He stole my dad's ID. I said to him. I don't care, where's your ID? He asked me. I then began to sweat. I don't have one. I then said to him. What do you mean? The guard asked as he got impatient. Look, you need an ID otherwise you will be taken outside. The guard continued. I am just here to take a tour around this place. I then said. Oh, then you are going to have to go out until we get your full name and address. But what about my dad's ID? I will inform him about that later. The guard said as I then showed him the piece of paper. I really need to talk to this guy. I said as the guard, he grabbed me and then began to escort me out. You can call him or something. The guard said as he then pushed me further down the hallway. Please. I pleaded with him. I can't. The guard continued as I then dropped the piece of paper on the floor as he then closed the door behind me. I then walked over to the bench opposite the HQ. I then sat down and began to cry. This is all my fault. I said to myself as it began to rain. Oh great. I said as all my luck was unfolding. Suddenly one of the legs of the bench then collapsed. Ow. I said to myself as I hit the ground. I just can't believe it. I said as all of a sudden the guard came back out and said to me. Hey dude, you forget this. He said as he passed me the remains of the ID of my dad. I then smiled. Oh thank you. I said as the guard also gave me a banana. Here in case you are hungry. He said as I smiled. Thank you. I replied as he came and sat down next to me. I'm sorry to hear about your dad, by the way. The guard said. My father wasn't much in my life and it hurts every day not knowing who he was or why he left. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I said to the guard as he began tearing up. Do you want a bit of my banana? I asked him. No, no. I'm fine. The guard continued as he then cried. I then proceeded to hug him. All of a sudden, he pulled back from the hugging and looked me in the eye. He then kissed me. What are you doing? I said as I pushed him away. Sorry, I thought it's what you wanted. The guard said. I don't even know your name. I said to him. It's Jack. He said as he showed me his ID badge. Oh, I used to know a different Jack in primary school. I said to him. Oh cool. Jack said. He used to get in trouble for everything. I continued. Same. Jack replied. I think one time he got in trouble for blocking the toilets. No way, I used to do that. Jack continued. Oh. I suddenly realized as I then said. You didn't go to Hill Valley High? I asked him. Why, yes, I did. Jack replied. Oh. I said. So did I. I continued as Jack said. I knew I recognized that beautiful face. He said to me as he then tried to kiss me again. I pushed him away. Dude, I'm not gay. I said as he then got angry. I used to like you, and I put secret messages in your locker. Those were from you? I said as I was confused. I thought they were from Jesse. Jesse wouldn't go out with you in 100 years. Jack said as I then finished eating the banana. Oh. I repeated as all of a sudden there was a car that pulled up next to us. Jack. The driver said. This is my ride. Jack said as he got up and walked over to the car. I looked at him. Can I come with you? I asked Jack. He turned around and smiled. Of course. Jack said as he opened the door for me to get into the car. So where are we going? I asked Jack. We are going to a strip club. Jack replied. Oh. I said surprised. Is this what you normally do? I asked him. What do you mean? He replied. Just get off work and then go straight to the strip club. I said. Well, I have nowhere else to go. He said as I closed the door. What do you mean by that? I asked him. Well, my husband left me. Jack replied. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I said as the driver then put the car into drive and began to drive off onto the motorway. So are you going to the strip club to find a new partner? I asked. Well, who knows what will happen? Jack said as I then turned away from him to look at the window. I was just sitting there for over 20 minutes as Jack was talking to the driver. I then looked at the strip club as we just turned the corner into it. Is this where we are partying? I asked Jack as the place looked like a shithole. Not even my mom would want to work here. I said as Jack then got out of the car and I was still sitting inside. So how will you be paying? Cash or card? The driver said. I then began to get nervous as I didn't have any money. I then looked at Jack as he was walking into the club. Jack. I shouted as he forgot to pay. I need some money. I shouted again. He didn't respond. Look, dude, I don't have any money. I don't care. Me and the driver exchanged words. I need payment, otherwise you are not getting out of this car. He said. He then locked the car door. If you are going to lock me in, how am I going to get you some money? I said as he then began to put the car into reserve and park the car up. He then got out of the car as he locked me in it. Sir, you can't do this, it's illegal. I said, kicking and screaming, trying to get away out of the car. Everyone was just looking at me. Hey sir, over there, come here and open up the car. I said to him. He shook his head. I don't want to get involved with your bullshit. He said as he turned away. I continued to push and pull on the door handle as I tried to get the door open. Please let me out. I said as the driver was still inside the club. I then pushed the door much harder. All of a sudden it came off and then fell over. I fell out of the car and onto the ground. Ow. I said to myself as I dusted myself off and walked towards the strip club. The bouncer then stood in my way. What do you think you are doing? He asked. I need to go see a few people. I said. Not a chance. The bouncer said as I tried to get past him anyway. I really need to see people. I said. Look, I can't let anyone else in, there is a secret meeting going on. The bouncer replied. But I just saw my friend go in there. Well, he showed me the ID and I let him in. He stole my dad's ID. I said. I don't care. The bouncer continued. You gotta let me in, otherwise there will be trouble. I said to the bouncer as he kept pushing me back. Oh, what sort of trouble? He asked. They are planning to kill someone. I don't care. The bouncer said as all of a sudden I then punched him. He dodged out of the way as I then skid past him and snuck into the door. Stop everything! I blurted out as I busted into the room as everyone was talking about whatever they were talking about. Jack then looked at me. What are you doing? Jack said to me. I'm stopping this hit. I said. We aren't planning a hit on anyone? Jack said. I then went red in the face. But then what are you doing here? I asked them. We are planning a birthday party. Jack said. For who? I asked. We can't say. One of the people said. Oh, can I help plan the party then? I said to them as I looked embarrassed. Jack looked around the room. Okay? He replied as he didn't know what to say. I then walked down to the seats as I sat down next to Jack. So who are we planning for? I asked. Well, it's just a friend of ours. He replied as I looked around the room. I spotted a man on the other side of the table. Don't I know you? I suddenly said to the man on the other side of the table. I don't think so. He said. Jack then winked at the man. What's going on? I said to Jack. Nothing. He said as he tried to not smirk. All of a sudden, the man's mustache started to fall off. Excuse me. I said as I got up, really confused. Something is going on here and I need to be told right away. I said as I began to get stressed and began to panic. Surprise! Everyone then shouted as they jumped up on the table and balloons and banners fell down from the sky. I was shocked. What's going on? I said as I fell to the floor. The man's mustache fell off as he came over to me and grabbed my hand. Brother. He said. I was shocked. Who are you? I asked. It's me, your brother. He said. I don't have a brother. I replied. Well, half-brother. The man replied. I was in a state of shock. But my mom was a saint. I said to him. Your dad wasn't. He replied. But who is your mom? I then asked as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a picture of my father and his mother. Her? I said to him. What about my mother? The so-called brother said. She used to be the local whore. I said. So? He replied. I'm just saying. I said to him. So are we really brothers? I asked the man. Yes. He said as I stood up and sat down on the chair. So what's your name? I asked him as everyone else was just looking at us. We will let you get to know each other. Jack said as everyone else left the room. My name is Reg. The man said. Oh Reg, that is a nice name, my name is George. I said to him. So tell me more about your mom. I asked Reg. Well, she wasn't really in my life. He said to me. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I said to him. My mom was always supportive to me and she helped me become the man I am today. I continued as Reg was writing it down. Oh, okay. Reg replied. Our dad wasn't really in my life, was he in yours a lot? No, not really, actually I found out that he died recently. Oh. Reg said as he was shocked. I didn't know that, I just assumed he died when I was young. Reg replied. I then pulled out the remains of the ID card and showed him. Here. I said to Reg. This isn't my dad. Reg replied. But this is my dad. I said to him. No, he had a different name. Reg replied. Oh. I said, shocked. Reg then reached into his pocket and began to search for a picture of his father. Here. Reg said as he showed me. This is my father, he was just using a different name. I said. Oh. Reg said as he smacked his head. I can see it now. Reg said as he pointed at his nose. Oh, sorry for doubting you earlier. He said to me. No, it's not a problem. I said to him as he then grabbed my hand. What are you doing? I said. He then slowly leaned on me. He then kissed me. I pushed him away. What the fuck are you doing? I said as I got up and walked far away. Sorry, I wasn't thinking. Reg said. I'm your stepbrother. I said as I then tried to reach for the doorknob. Reg got up and walked up after me. No please, you can't tell anyone about this, it was just a mistake. I then opened the door and began to dash out of it. Jack was waiting outside for me. How did it go in there? He asked me. Just get me the fuck of here. I said as Jack then took me back to the car as the driver was waiting inside. I see you didn't fix the door. I said to the driver. What do you expect me to do? He asked. I shrugged my shoulders. Me and Jack got back into the car as he then started up the engine. Can you take us back to my place? Jack asked. Sure. The driver said. You haven't even told me your name. I asked the driver. My name? He said. It's not important. So what happened when you and Reg talked? Jack asked. You don't want to know. I replied to Jack as I was holding on to him as I didn't want to fall out of the car as the car door was still open. We must have been driving down the road for over 20 minutes as all of a sudden police sirens came on. Oh shit. The driver said. What are we going to do? Jack said as he then began to panic. What, why? I asked as the wind was coming through the gap where the door was as a huge breeze. The driver then put his foot on the brakes. I bashed my head onto the ceiling of the car. Ow. I said as the driver said. Sorry. The police then pulled up behind us. What do you think you are doing? The officer said as he came out of his car and walked up towards us. We aren't doing anything illegal, officer. Jack said. Well, this missing door will say otherwise. The officer replied. We are going to get that fixed. The driver said as I was looking at the officer. Don't I know you? The officer said to me. Me? I replied. No, we have never met before. I continued as I tried to get him off my case. The officer was stroking his beard as he tried to remember me. I think I have seen you before. The officer announced as he pulled out a ticket machine. Do you mind if I take your details? The officer asked me. I'm sure. I said as I then gave him a fake name. Oh, okay, Jake, just let me run these details through the system. I then laughed as I said to Jack. Ha, I lied to an officer. Jack was shaking his head. That is very bad, George. He said. Why? I replied confused. Because now he is going to arrest you for supplying false information. But. I said as the officer came back. That name isn't coming up. How do you spell Wazowski? The officer asked. With 2 O's. I said as the officer was writing that down. Oh, okay, let me run that through the computer. The officer said as Jack looked at me disappointed. You shouldn't lie to the police officer. He said. You do it all the time. I said to him. No, I don't. All of a sudden, the driver of the car then got out. The officer dropped everything and rushed over. Hey! He said. Stop right there. He continued as the driver went round to the trunk. The officer pulled out his gun and was aiming right at him. I'm just getting out some bananas. The driver said. I don't care. The officer said as then put his finger on the trigger. Get back in the car. He shouted as I was just sitting there in shock. Why are you doing this? Because he is black? I asked the officer. All of a sudden, the trigger went off as all I heard was a single bullet. The bullet went straight into the driver's back. He fell to the ground as the officer then radioed for backup. I looked at Jack. What the fuck? I said as Jack then ducked from the glass that shattered everywhere. The officer then dashed up next to the car, still holding his pistol. Now behave, he demanded. We haven't done anything, Jack said. I don't care, the officer continued to say as the driver was laying at the back of the car, bleeding out of his back. Are you going to call an ambulance? I asked the officer. Fuck no, he continued to say as he then spat at me. I was shocked. Hey, I yelled at him. Don't do that to me, I said as I grabbed him and hit him in the nuts. He then dropped the gun as he slowly reached for his balls. I then grabbed the gun and pointed it at him. Call the medics, I threatened as I was still in the back seat of the car, trying to get out. No, the officer replied as he trapped me in the car. Give back the gun, he said to me. Not a chance, I repeated as I then tipped all the bullets out of the clip. I then tried to move past the officer as he was still blocking me in the car. I dodged past him as Jack got out the other side. We rushed to the driver who was laying on the ground. Everything will be okay, bro, Jack said as I was shocked. He is your brother? I said to Jack. Why yes, where else do you think I am going to get a driver on short notice? Jack said as he was taking off his top and trying to stop the bleeding. All of a sudden, there were 2 more police cars coming up down the street. What are we going to say to the police? I said to Jack. Say the truth? Jack replied as I was panicking. The officers pulled over and came over to us. What's going on here? The officer questioned as he saw the other officer laying on the ground and the gun's bullets all over the floor. Stay still, he suddenly said as everyone was panicking. You shot the officer? He asked. No, he is just resting after I kicked him in the balls, I admitted as the other officers came over and placed me and Jack in handcuffs. We need to get him to a hospital, Jack said as his brother was still laying on the floor. You're okay, nice prank you are pulling on us, the officer said as they didn't care. Jack's head was slammed against the boot of the police car. There is no prank, he has really been shot, Jack said as I was being put in the back of the other police car. Please help my friend, I added as the officer got in the front of the car as he then put up the barrier between the front and the back of the police car. The officer then drove off as Jack and his brother were left behind as I looked out the back of the police car. Please help them, I said as I was banging on the back of the barrier. Sorry, job must be done, the officer replied. I was being transported away from the scene as Jack and his brother were getting no help. I was trying to get out of the car as I was struggling. This force is corrupt, I said as the police officer then pulled over the car. That is a lie, the officer said as he took out his baton. What are you doing? I said as I then began to get scared. He then turned off the radio as he then walked around to the back of the car. He then began to hit me. Ow, I said as a bruise came up. He then continued to hit me. I then tried to put myself into a shell as I was trying to protect myself. After 10 long minutes of being beaten up by the police officer, he then walked away. I was wiping the blood from my nose. What was that for? I said as I then found one of my teeth on the back seat. The officer then got back into the driving seat as he then turned on his radio. You are a cunt, I said to him as he then spat at me. Fuck you, he said as he continued to get rude at me. I was just trying to regain focus as my head was hurting. He then restarted the car and began to drive off. I'm going to tell your bosses, I said to him. You won't, the officer said as he then put his foot on the gas. Whoa. Can you slow down? I said to him. He looked at me. No, he repeated as he then swerved around the corner. I hit my head on the ceiling of the car. Surely this is illegal. I said. You will do what I say. The officer continued as I knew I was fighting a losing battle. I then took a big sigh and sat down and looked out the window. All of a sudden, the police radio went off. All units, all units. They said as I was shocked at what was going on. Yes, Officer Brown on the way. The officer said as he then drove round the bend. I held on to the handlebar above my head. Sir, I need medical assistance. I said as he wasn't listening as he went to the scene of the crime. He didn't say anything. I was still trying to get out of the car as we were flying down the motorway at 100 miles per hour. Please. I said as I then began to start to feel sick. I banged on the officer's chair. He kept ignoring me. I then threw up all the back seats of the car as I couldn't hold in all the sickness I was feeling. We were driving around town really fast as all of a sudden he slammed on the brakes. I flew forward and slammed my head on the ceiling. The officer then got out of the car. I was banging on the door as I was trying to get out. Everyone was ignoring me as they were dealing with the car crash into the tree. I was looking around the car, trying to work my way out. My feet were 10 feet deep in my own vomit and blood as I was trying to look for the key or something. I grabbed the gear stick, trying to wiggle it around. It then moved as it went into reserve. The car suddenly started to go backwards as I was trying to make noise. I couldn't believe what was happening as the car was rolling backwards and slowly going towards the edge of the cliff. I banged on the door once. All of a sudden, the car then went over the edge. I screamed as the car plunged into the water. There was a big splash as water began to sneak through the windows as I was just really shocked that this would happen. I tried banging onto the doors, trying to unlock them. This can't be the end. I said to myself as I then managed to get the door unstuck. It then went flying off. I managed to get out of the car and began to swim for my life. I managed to swim to the surface as I spotted the police officers looking over from the cliff. Shit. You let one of our cars go for a swim, dude. How are you going to explain that to the chief? One officer said to the other officer. I don't know. The officer replied, looking quite embarrassed. I just say a criminal stole it. He said as the other officer rolled his eyes. You are lucky we are friends. The other officer said as I then swam to the end of the stream. Quick. The officer said as I was running out of breath. Help me. I shouted to the police. One of them jumped into the water and began to swim to save me. I was floundering around as I couldn't swim for much longer. All of a sudden, someone grabbed my hand. Here, come over here. The officer said as the other officer was taking a selfie off the edge of the cliff. Sorry about that. The officer said as I was being pulled up onto the rocks. I'm going to sue your entire force's ass off. I said as I was coughing up water. The officer then pushed me back into the water. Hey. I said as I swam back up to the surface. I don't want to help you. He suddenly said. You are all the same. I said to him as he was then ignoring me. You are going to be in so much trouble. He said to me as he had a change of heart. I haven't done anything. I said. Well, who then controlled the car? The officer asked. Because it didn't roll itself down. He forgot to put it on the brake. I said to him. I don't care. The officer said as he jumped into the water and chased me. He then grabbed me. What are you doing? I said as I was trying to swim away. He then put his handcuffs on me. No. I loudly shouted at him as I tried to fight him off. Go away. I said to him. His gun fell out of his pocket. I then grabbed it. Don't make me do it. I said as I was then panicking. All of a sudden a gunshot went off. I then looked at my chest as blood began floating up to the surface. I then began to start feeling faint. You did this. I said to the officer as I pointed my finger on his chest. He was grabbing me. I haven't done anything, the officer said as I then slowly looked up at the sun as I wasn't feeling the best. I'm going to die, I said quietly to him as I grabbed him with all the strength I had left. No, you are going to be fine, the officer said as he grabbed me and tried to start swimming to the cliff edge. He placed me on the rocks as he then got up and began to start doing CPR on me. It's too late, the other officer said to him as I laid there flat as a pancake. He then kicked the lifeless body. I can't believe this, the officer said as he began to tear up. I didn't mean this to happen. I was just trying to be tough on him. I guess you won't be reporting my errors to the boss now, the other officer said. What do you mean? He said. Well, the whole reason the car fell into the water was my fault, the bad officer said. Look, now isn't the time. We need to tell this guy's family. I don't care about this guy, the other officer said as he then looked down to the ground. He then reached down and picked up the gun. Here you go, he said as he then shot the other officer in the back. He went straight down to the ground like a bag of rocks. The officer couldn't believe what he had done. He had gone manic. What am I doing? He said to himself as he looked over at the two lifeless bodies lying up against the river. I'm going to be in so much trouble, the officer said as he pulled out his wallet and threw all the items on the floor. I'm going to have to start my life over, the officer admitted as he threw his police radio into the water. He then looked up at the cliff edge as no one was watching him. He then got into the water and began to swim down the stream. He was sweating as he couldn't believe what he had done. That isn't me, he said to himself as he swam for over 15 minutes as he had now gone on the run. He went over to the riverbank and got out of the water, soaking wet as he dripped water at every step. It was by a road, so the officer waited for a car to come down the road. I can't believe I did that, he said to himself over and over as suddenly a jeep was coming down the road. The officer stood in the middle of the road as he tried to get the driver's attention. The jeep slowed down as the officer walked up to the driver's window. Official police business, he said as he showed the driver his uniform. Okay, get in, the driver replied as the police officer walked around to the passenger's seat. As he got in, the driver could see he was covered in blood. She muttered. The officer looked at her. What's with all the blood? She asked as she pointed at him. The officer then began to get sweaty and was worrying about what to say.